Good morning, LinkedIn. My name is Joel Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Practical Leadership, an opportunity for you to learn how to be a more effective leader and build leadership habits into your daily work. If you are tuning in live or watching the recording, please say hello in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. We always like to see the pins that are on the map across the globe. And if you joined us for our last session on people, process, and purpose with Matt Harris, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about how you've been focusing on your purpose this week and driving purpose within your team. So don't be shy, light up that comment section. We'd love to see who's here. During these sessions, if you haven't been a part of it before, we try to tackle real leadership challenges and topics. I encourage you to apply what you're learning and put it into practice with some super simple, actionable steps to build it into your own leadership practices. And I've asked leadership experts from around the world to join me to provide their own perspectives and experiences along the way. So today I'm excited to be joined by Catherine Harrison, president of Purple Voodoo, and a good friend. I've known Catherine for the last 6 years, and we've worked on a number of projects together. And little known fact, she's actually my Canadian twin. So go superpower, super twins. Thanks for joining me, Catherine. It's been too long since we've done this.
Indeed, it has. I'm thrilled. I think we should be making this into a weekly situation.
Okay, we can work on that for sure.
Well, you work on it and just invite me. That's the way I like to. That's the way I like to roll.
If you're joining us today, our topic is going to be on human-centered leadership. If you are a leader or a human, this is going to be pretty applicable to you, and hopefully we'll have some laughs along the way. So I'm excited to get Catherine's thoughts on the topic. I want to reinforce throughout this, though, that we would love for you to be part of the process. We want you to be active in the comments. Please ask your questions, share your own experiences, perspectives. If there's key takeaways that you feel like really hit the nail on the head, drop those in the chat as well. We'd really appreciate that. So let's see who has wandered in since we've started. Nurdan, thanks for joining us from London, Ontario. David from Ottumwa, Iowa. Tanya from Newton. Megan, good to see you back from Rockford. I think, Megan, you have now earned your Practical Leadership Groupie Badge, Tier 1, for your participation. Arlene Quinn, as always, joining us from Western Australia. She, at least at this point, is our furthest from this virtual point on the globe. So thanks for coming again, Arlene. It's fantastic to have as many guests, and feel free as you check in to drop yours in as well. So it looks like we've got a good group assembled, and I'd love to go ahead and get started. You ready, Catherine?
As ready as I'll ever be, Joel.
All right. So I met you 6 years ago in the great country of Canada. We can put that aside for now, but I remember asking you, we sat at a table together at a conference. I remember asking you, what is it that you do? And you said you were focused on human-centered leadership. And at the time, I had really never heard of such a thing before. But now it's becoming much more of a trend, or becoming trendy. People are talking about human-centered leadership much more often. Yeah. Heck, you've even written a book that talks about human-centered leadership. So talk to me a little bit. When you say human-centered leadership, what does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah, well, like you say, I've been practicing it and talking about it for probably over 20 years now. And it's something that's gaining traction and popularity. Folks like Josh Bersin are starting to talk about it now. And really, I think that the pandemic catalyzed this interest in human-centered leadership. But it's still pretty nebulous, and like other conversations you and I have had, it's still pretty binary, right? It's either this or it's that. So when I think of human-centered leadership, I think we need to first talk about what it means to be human. Generally, we are all made of the same stuff, right? Physically, genetically, we all start the same, we all end the same, little baby to dead person. We know, like, our physiology, neurobiology, all of this magical interconnected system that keeps us alive generally are all the same. Lived experiences differ, but the human stuff, the basic human stuff is all the same. So the brain and the heart and the gut, all the same. So it's interesting that we think, or the paradigm thus far has been, we think that when we go to work, all of this human interconnectedness stops and we become non-human productivity machines. And so human-centered leadership, from my perspective, is really about reconnecting to that, the shared humanness, the recognition of this foundational, innate biological, psychological, and sociological needs that we all have, and that these are all profoundly interconnected and interdependent aspects of optimal well-being within an organization and within a society. And I think when we talk about human-centered leadership, when we talk about organizations, we also need to expand our thinking outside of just, companies. We can think of an organization as a school, as a hospital, as a government, as a sports team, a nonprofit, a neighborhood, even a family, any sort of community. And so that's kind of the nut of it, is reconnecting to our humanness, and that focusing on the similarities versus the differences. And in doing so, human-centered leaders are self-aware first, deeply curious, and driven to contribute to a world where all aspects of the natural world, including humans, are treated with respect, compassion, and love. And this is where I lose a lot of people, because they start going, is this like a far left, vegan only, tree hugging love circle? Which, if you dig that, that's super cool. But what it is recognizing that to realize sustained organizational performance over time, we need to recognize this about the human beings who make the stuff, sell the stuff, buy the stuff, design processes around the stuff. Like, it's all humans. We all do this stuff. Even if we're disconnected, we're still doing this stuff. And I think, one of the things that I say to folks who think it's a little too, left-leaning, is I always bring to mind the example of Pete Carroll, who's a Seahawks coach, NFL Seahawks coach, Seattle Seahawks. And he actually is very open and explicit about how his primary leadership and culture tenets are love, compassion, and empathy. And it helps that team be as competitive as possible and optimize their performance.
Yeah.
And so it's about basically taking that and recognizing that it is not separate from optimized performance, but actually a necessary aspect to recognize it. And it's this harmony of the two things that changes the paradigm, and that's where we have to get to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and people may not know, but I actually went to school to be a history and geography major, to be a teacher originally, and did that for a little while before I started in the business world. But if you look at history and really the Industrial Revolution, that's when we started to change our perspective on what employees were. They were kind of a cog in the machine. They were part of the process. They were expendable. They were replaceable. And I work a lot in production environments, in construction environments, field service, all types of things where everybody's got a role. But one of the things that I noticed, a number of years ago, was the best leaders that worked in those environments focused on the people first, because they realized that they couldn't do any of the process stuff, the role stuff, the task stuff, if they didn't have A, good people, and B, treat them well. Right. And so the more that they're connected with their people, the human side of this, the better the process, the program, the project stuff went.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about human-centered leadership, and of course, for some people, this is going to feel like a very soft topic, a very, very, hold hands, sing kumbaya around the fire kind of a thing, but it's not. I mean, we see so many examples in, some of these tough production type environments where the highest performing teams are the ones where the people are the center of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you say, we need to get away from this binary thinking. And, the binary thinking exists sort of across our society now, right? Sociopolitically, certainly, we all have you're either on this side or on that side. You either think it's this or it's that. And this certainly is true in this space too. You're either a human-centered leader or a business-centered leader. But businesses, we need to actually change that paradigm and say you can focus on achieving great results and being strategic and focusing on profit and efficiency, productivities, accountability, all that stuff, and keep human well-being as a strategic imperative, because without it, and particularly, this is a whole separate topic, but particularly as we roll into the next 5+ years and artificial intelligence starts coming, because a lot of that productivity is going to be outsourced, and that's just the way it is. It's going to be even more important that we focus on our innate human conditions, the biological, psychological, and sociological needs that help us optimize leveraging AI or managing AI in thoughtful ways. And I think this quote was attributed to Einstein, maybe somebody else, I'm not sure, but it fits here, which is we cannot use the same thinking that got us into these problems to drive new solutions. And that's where human-centered leadership also comes out, right? Business-centered leaders see people as units of labor, and human-centered leaders see people as units of possibility and potential. And that's one of the most important distinctions between the two.
Yeah. So a lot of my work does deal with, new leaders, new managers, folks that have been promoted into roles and maybe may or may not be equipped to do that. But so if one of those folks were watching today, or somebody that was leading a team full of new leaders and wanted to talk to them about human-centered leadership, why should this matter to them, specifically a new leader?
Well, okay. I think that the new leaders, and I don't know what age cohort we're talking about, I actually have a lot of faith. Actually, that's where my optimism resides, is in the new leaders. And so this conversation matters because the current systems, my opinion, are broken. And I think we're either at or close to a tipping point. The world collectively is experiencing concurrent crises, right? Health crises, mental health crises, socioeconomic crises, employment engagement, retention. Our whole system is kind of like, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Do we find people? Do we engage people? Do we not find people? As I mentioned earlier, social political polarity, deep prejudice, fear, refugee crises, climate change. All of this is kind of rooted in this human disconnection and distraction. And so one way to remedy these crises is by moving away from this very finite, very myopic and rigid structuralist approach to defining what a leader is and what it is not, and actually encouraging these kind of conversations to cultivate open-mindedness and truly innovative thinking. So it matters because as new leaders take on this functional mantle of responsibility, they can build in and learn and then apply, most importantly, they can learn and apply some of these tenets that will not actually be part of their leadership training likely, right? And we need to bring some consciousness to the workplace. And I believe deeply that human-centered leadership is tied explicitly to mindfulness, presence, awareness, and accountability. And in fact, there's an interesting axiomic framework from mindfulness that can be applied here, which is the IAA framework, which is about intention, attention, and attitude. And this translates directly into learning about, so for these young leaders, learning about human-centered leadership, not just around the what, but what is the intention, attention, and attitude you bring to that learning? So for example, if you get training on how to be a leader, and there's lots of great training on how to be a good leader, and there's a lot of great language of values these days around human-centered leadership, and a lot of the words that I'm using, and as I said, Burson and Deloitte and McKinsey and all these big players are going to be using this language now, and it'll be amazing. And so someone can approach that training and feel like I have to do this training and I'm going to be forced to do some of this stuff because it's expected of me. But if my intention, attention, and attitude is not aligned, it's not going to work. So first of all, it's not going to work from your perspective, but also innately human is our deep sense of intuition. And humans see through this stuff, right? So the people that you are leading are going to be like, yeah, Johnny, he doesn't buy this stuff, right? So one of the things to get really curious about as a new leader is the fact that we have a system in place, we have an infrastructure in place, even our organizational systems, and even this multi-billion-dollar consulting industry that supports these organizations. We're very committed to having a language of values, but we don't often have the associated behaviors of values. So we show up, we do what we have to do to, show good face, talk about our corporate values. We have HR folks and leaders, hire trainers and consultants to teach us stuff. And although really well intended and relatively benign, nothing really changes, right? We don't hold ourselves accountable, and you and I and others have talked about this repeatedly. So we spend tons of currency, whether it's money, time, effort, or otherwise, pushing the shell around the board, learning about it, but not applying it. And so, to be honest, those new leaders, the younger leaders, are the ones I have the most optimism about, because I don't think I'm pessimistic that our current senior leaders are going to do anything purely just based on physics, like what's at rest stays at rest. And there's not an emotional incentive. Generally, they haven't had a catalytic moment. And that socialized belief system is too ingrained. But I just would really encourage, young leaders, and even young people who are not leaders per se, functionally, to really get curious about this conversation, to learn about this conversation, to observe and notice what's happening and how it aligns or misaligns with some of this language. Because, although people constantly, cast aspersions against young people, like millennials, this and the Gen Ys, whatever, I think that's just ageism in reverse. And quite frankly, I'm tired of it. We need to be actually supporting these folks and respecting and appreciating their creativity and their fresh insights, because they are, in fact, the leaders of the future.
Oh, yeah.
And like we've talked about a lot, start to cultivate specifically a non-binary approach to anything. Be careful and cautious about picking a side and really digging in. Anyways, I could speak for days on this topic.
I know. And sometimes we do. We get together and we speak for days on this kind of thing. I think additionally, what I would say to a new leader who says, why should this matter to me? I got a lot of other things on my plate. I'm trying to learn about, the different parts of my role. I'm trying to learn about the process. I'm trying to connect with almost always my advice is think about any problem you're going to come up against in the workplace. It's almost always going to either A, have a root with people, or B, be solved by people.
Yeah.
And so if you can't see that, if you just see the process or the project and you expect other people to get on board, one, you're going to be mistaken in the fact that you're actually going to get it done. But the other piece is, like I mentioned before, the highest performing teams have the greatest connection, and we can only connect if we see each other as people, right? Yeah. And so it's one of the reasons why I preach to new managers, be where your people are, right? Yeah. Be out amongst your people, talk with them, ask questions, engage them, right? And seeing them as people gets us, to kind of rewire this where you're a cog in the machine, do what I tell you, only talk when you're talked to, kind of a thing. And the problem with that for a lot of new leaders is that's what they hear, right? Don't get too connected with your people. You're not meant to be their friend. You're meant to be their boss. And some of those are well-intended, but they maybe send the wrong message. So let's maybe jump to.
Can I just jump in here? Yeah. Because I think what you're saying is really important. Again, that's a binary thing, right? You're either their friend or you're their manager. I'm like, well, how about neither and both? Like, let's just spend a little bit of time understanding what is the optimal relationship, and not label it so quickly. But I think what's an important distinction, and it's really a philosophy for new leaders and all leaders, but I feel strongly we will not solve the problems of the world by getting the ultra powerful to do anything different. I honestly don't think it's going to happen, right? They're yanked around by their inhumane, political, greed-based, power-based, selfish paradigms, whatever. This is not a slam against capitalism, because capitalism is really good when it's coupled with consciousness. But, that's the infrastructure. But we solve the problems of our world in microwaves. We solve the problems of our world by solving the problems of our family lives, our neighborhoods, our communities, our workplaces. And so, to your point, whoever and whatever you are leading, it might be one person, it might be 10 people, it might be 100 people. You might be leading small groups of other leader-led teams. Focus on that, right? That's how we actually solve the meaningful lives for many, many people. And And I think we just need to we have to be wary of the apathetic response, like infrastructure's too big, our belief systems and everything's too real. I'm like, yes, that's true. And where do we have control? Let's start there.
Yeah. So I see we've got a couple of comments and questions coming in. I just want to make sure that we address them if we can.
Sure.
David mentions during Kaizen events or continuous improvements events, we treat participants with care and work to understand their viewpoint. We can see them turn the corner because they're become more engaged and then more productive in the event after feeling heard and supported. On the production floor, it only compounds the payback of caring over time. I would agree, David. I mean, I've seen this as well, not just in Kaizen events, but in any kind of change opportunities in organizations. When we engage people, I think it was Jack Welch who said, "Hey, you've got my hands. Why don't you use my head and my heart as well?" And so the more we engage people, the better off we're going to be. Jenny, I think, was talking about the required opportunity of going to training. Yeah, it's not great when it's required. It's much better when people actually see the value in it. Tanya loves your pushing the shell example. Megan, our current systems need to be fixed. I returned to school, recently obtained my MHA to help lead healthcare organizations. Working within healthcare for 18 plus years has helped me understand what is needed to help make a positive impact. Servant and coaching leadership is so important to help teams. You need to understand what you're leading, listen to individuals you're leading, and learn from whom you are leading. Absolutely. Amen.
And Megan, I would just like to add that with your expertise and experience in healthcare, you will explicitly know the interconnectivity of, biological, physiological, psychological, and social group, the interconnectedness and interdependence of that. And I think that's a great place for you to leverage your experience and your expertise there.
Awesome. And then David is asking the question, any tips or resources for coaching human-centered leadership up or adjacent in the org structure? Any tips you'd have for David when, instead of trying to teach down, how do I layer this in so my boss understands it, or maybe others that are peers in the organization understand it? Any tips for David?
Yeah, I would suggest that we focus only on what we control, which is ourselves. Really, that's the only thing we can control 100%, which is ourselves. And so, David, I would suggest that you learning and getting self-aware and getting curious and starting to practice this by yourself, for yourself, or with your either functional direct reports or peers, or even with those senior folks. You can practice human-centered leadership stuff by role modeling this. And then people start going, hey, what's with David? And like, why is everybody like whistling at work? Why are they getting stuff done? Why, it's just amazing. So I always suggest that people get their own homes in order before they start putting things in place outside of that. So, and then you just really, generally and practically speaking, David, coaching up and adjacent is about asking good questions. I know, Joel, you had somebody on a couple of weeks ago about asking, but asking really meaningful questions, staying present and listening to the answer, exploring the answer a little bit more. And then once you learn more about the human-centered leadership philosophy and ideology, you can start to investigate and integrate and participate in those conversations in a far more meaningful way. And all of a sudden, I think the leading by example is one of the most powerful ways that you can lead up and across an organization.
Yeah. And my advice, David, was pretty similar, but I'm much more practical in that. I mean, do it and get great results, and people are going to ask what you're doing differently, right? They're going to see it, and that's your opportunity to say to your boss or to your peers, hey, when I run into those issues, here's how I think about it. Here's how I interact with people. Here's how I ask for feedback, and it works, right? Things that work typically drive other people to try things that work. So, keep at it, David. I appreciate you asking the question. So I know we're starting to wind down on time here, Catherine. I'm going to go back to that new manager. What do you think is going to be the biggest challenge if they try to start building this into their daily routine? What do you think the biggest challenge for them is going to be, so that they know it's there and maybe they can work ways around it?
I I think, and this is actually really aligned with what we were just talking about. First, I would suggest that the biggest challenge is momentum, right? So even the new managers, we have been bathing in belief systems and our own socialization for a long, long time. And that means we all come to the table with these kind of, assumptions, biases, perceptions, etc. So even just, again, like I was saying to David, just get curious about some of your own stuff that is there. So this is the first place to invest our attention, is understanding that stuff and overcoming our own momentum to just continue along the old way.
Right.
The second challenge, I would say, is, again, like I said, we're bathing in it. So from a macro level, our societal cultural stuff, and from a more micro level, our organizational culture stuff is anchored in the old way. And it takes a lot of energy to swim against the current. It takes a lot of energy to push a barge that is anchored in the river. So that's a big challenge. So even just knowing that in advance helps us to mitigate this sense of like, oh, I tried, it didn't work, whatever, that's
Right.
number two. And as you and I talked about a lot, Joel, habit change is hard, right? So engage with others that are interested in this conversation and in change, and start small. And so, we're noticing people who come to these sessions. You notice other people, when you start Googling it, you're going to find a whole bunch of people who are really interested in looking at how this kind of human-centered practice can show up in the workplace. Join the conversation. So the biggest challenge is kind of overcoming some of that stagnation and moving it forward, and really reconciling the balance between our innate human desire for striving, for moving forward, for self-determined progress, because that is an innate human thing, and our need for balance and detachment and depersonalizing and accepting what is. And so these seemingly opposite concepts are interconnected and two sides of the same coin, also deeply rooted in that sort of mindfulness approach that I talked about earlier.
Yeah. All right. So here's where we get to the meat of the program. That we like to keep things practical, or we wouldn't call this practical leadership. So if we think about just really small steps that help us gain that momentum, what's one simple step you could suggest somebody watching today put into practice, even yet this week, to start moving in the right direction as a human-centered leader?
Well, I would, again, focus on what you have 100% control over, which is you. So I would encourage everyone to do this one thing. Well, it's a 1A and B, because I can't help myself. After this session, invest 30 minutes to self-reflect. So if human-centered leadership is about self-reflection and self-awareness, do that. What resonated? What did you know but you don't do? What really bugged you or irked you about this? What don't you like? What did you like? Do you know why you like or don't like some of these things? Consider your current places of work and your current daily work practices. What might be possible? What benefit do you get from the current system? What benefit might you get? Like, really just kind of spend 30 minutes going, what was it about that conversation that engaged me or made me uncomfortable or made me strive? And then identify the one thing that would make the biggest difference, and take responsibility and do it.
Yeah, great. So there you have it. As we have been using LinkedIn here for the last, we're on 10 weeks now. I'd like to use this session as an opportunity for you to already start to do that self-reflection, and with the intent of moving forward, right? Taking action on it, and being accountable to yourself for that. You've invested this time today to learn more about human-centered leadership. But as Catherine mentioned earlier, that investment's going to be completely wasted if you just know it, but don't do something with it. So I want you to identify one thing that you're going to commit to doing over the next 7 days, to take your leadership to the next level. And once you have that, I want you to drop it in the comments, both for you, because that way we know the reflection happened, but also for others who are starting this journey for themselves. So hopefully when you join us again next week, you can share how things went and what you've been focused in on to both motivate yourself to keep it going and also encourage others to do it as well. So take 15 seconds now, drop your thoughts in the chat. We'd really appreciate that. And while they're doing it, I want to thank you again, Catherine, my wonder twin, for joining me today. It's been so much fun to be here with you and talk about something you're so passionate about. It really kind of brings a tear to my eye that we don't do this more often. So thank you again.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. And well done on creating really a town square for people to engage in these kind of conversations. All of them have been fantastic.
Thank you. So if you want to get a hold of Catherine and hear more about her work, I'd encourage you to reach out to her on LinkedIn and follow her post. If you are a reader, and if you actually are on LinkedIn, you probably are a reader. But if you're a reader of books, do yourself a favor and pick up her book, 3 Colors, 12 Notes. It's a great read. You're going to learn a lot of not just about Catherine, but about yourself. And I've loved the work, and I really appreciate Catherine as a friend. So that brings us to next week. I'm excited to announce that Nerdan Tokos will be joining me to explore battling the fear of change, which is already come up today in this session. So keep your eyes out on LinkedIn for that event, which will be posted hopefully later today. Or if you'd like, drop me a note in the comments asking for me to personally invite you, and I'll make sure that you get that personally. If you've stumbled upon this video and we're not connected on LinkedIn, please send me a request, mention the show, and we'll remedy that. I'd love to learn more about you and be a resource if I can. And so again, I'd like to encourage you to take something that you heard today and to put it into practice even as soon as today, so that you can be the leader your team needs right now. And so whether you can join us next week or not, always recognize that these recordings are available either through LinkedIn, the event posts, or on our YouTube page. But regardless of whether you're going to join us, thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you next week. Blessings.
Take care, everybody.